The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain. Hey everybody, welcome back for another tantalizing episode of the Your Mountain podcast.
This will be the longest, highest quality audio Your Mountain podcast ever because we have so much space in our account for hosting podcasts because we haven't done one for like the last year.
So it hasn't been quite that long, but we have been a little bit more sporadic. It's been more like every other week, and I blame that on a few things. One,
mostly the government.
Well, I was actually going to blame it mostly on hunting season happening to occur really for all of us in October. October, and I know Mike, you've been very busy with work. There's been a lot going on that's prevented you from being able to do some of this too recently. Yeah. And then Nephi and I have had different hunting schedules, and so getting the three of us together has been a challenge. I think it's going to be. It's challenging. I know. You see what I was doing there? Yep. It's not a challenging issue. It's just challenging.
It's challenging. It's been challenging.
It's been challenging to get us all together.
It's a new word.
But I think we're moving past big game season. We got Mike and I are doing a cow elk hunt this week. Nephi, you're completely tagged out, so you're done. And then we got bird season coming up here.
I'm so bored now. I literally the other day I was like, what am I going to do now? I was sad.
Yeah, well, reorganize your gear.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna clean the garage and try and get
buy more gear, unload gear on us.
Dude, I've got so much gear to give away. You're gonna be so happy.
Awesome. But the problem is sometimes you give me clothes and then I'm like, it hits me about my elbow. It turns out we're different sized dudes.
Is your elbow around your waist? Because I feel like that's what really happens.
That means it probably fit me.
Oh yeah.
But I'm glad that we are all able to be here, and I'm hopeful for everybody listening. I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to get back onto a more regular schedule now that the big distractions of big game hunting are behind us at this point, and we're moving on to waterfowl, which has a lot more flexibility. Mm-hmm. And hunting season is really
I think it's hilarious you blame hunting for this when we've had some of the most crazy stuff. I mean, we got a pandemic. We got the weirdest election that ever occurred. And then you're like, well, you know what it really was? It's because you like to hunt on Tuesdays and I like to hunt on Wednesdays.
But isn't that kind of what it was?
It sort of was, but right. It is funny that still drove it when there was a lot of other stuff to deal with.
And we're going to talk about some of that other stuff. Right. One of those things in particular, we haven't had a chance to record an episode since this uncontroversial, run-of-the-mill, basic election that we had at the national level here. It was a couple of weeks ago now. And
is it a couple of weeks?
I think it's 2 weeks as of the release date of this podcast.
As we all know from social media feeds, it's not over.
Oh, Nephi.
No, it's not. There is a special election that will happen in
Georgia. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, we don't know the Senate yet.
That's what I was referring to. Is we don't know the Senate. There's a special election in Georgia, but
I read through. I know what you mean.
Yeah, and
bizarre.
And I'm sure everybody's been following this, but Georgia matters. Georgia matters a lot because how Georgia goes will determine who controls the Senate.
That's right.
And why, from a hunter and angler standpoint, why is that important? Or just from a general conservationist standpoint, whatever standpoint you have, and political affiliations aside, just thinking about why that's important for the issues that we follow. Mm-hmm. And for one reason, the very first reason I'd mention is and then I'll kick it to you guys for other reasons, but the first thing that comes to my mind is with a Biden presidency, right, if Democrats control the Senate as well, there could be a push to use what's called the Congressional Review Act to overturn, I don't know if overturn is the right word. That's
to revisit decisions that were made.
But basically to to eliminate, I'm going to just say to overturn decisions that were made
should
by
say revisit,
the
'cause
to
they might
vacate,
not,
vacate decisions.
Yeah, and it's the act says a little bit more than that too, because it's like eviscerate it and you're never allowed to do it again, which could be problematic for some of the ones that, like the NEPA reform that occurred. Well, maybe we do want to do that again. Maybe efficiency is important, but maybe with a different perspective.
Maybe a different way, right?
Yeah.
And so the Congressional Review Act is one that, if an action is taken by an administration within a certain number of congressional days, and I want to say is it 45 or 60?
I thought it was 60.
Congressional days, not calendar days, not work days of the week for you and I, but days that Congress is actually in session.
And it's the calendar, which is not a day of a week either.
Right.
It's so weird.
Which means that
It's
like with the last
is what they say it is. It's whatever they want it to be.
And what it was when the Obama administration left and the Trump administration came in was you walked that back to about
May?
July or June. Maybe it was May, but it was like half the year to get that 60 working,
So
congressional days.
every rule that was finalized within that window of time was subject to review by Congress under the Congressional Review Act.
Right.
And so that's why there were several components that were tossed, more so than in history.
Right.
We won't know until when this session ends.
Yeah, it makes it much harder to do.
How many days? We won't know until. That's right. We
January
can't
3rd.
We can't count right now.
Yeah.
Go back and say here's what that date is. Is it June 10th or is it May 30th or is it July 5th? We won't know because that, like you said, the calendar's so squishy.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that if Democrats win both seats in Georgia in the special election that's occurring for both Senate seats, then Democrats control the Senate, and it brings the Congressional Review Act into play. And so anything passed in whatever that window of time is, anything passed in that window of time, or anything adopted regulatorily or finalized in that.
In what you're saying, just to put a finer point on it for those who maybe aren't necessarily paying attention, is that it's not just that the Senate is controlled by the Democrats, it's also the House. So you have House, Senate, and President falling under one party. So theoretically, there would be enough unanimity among that group to choose which ones have to go. Whereas if Republicans retain control in the Senate, it's very unlikely that they would agree to vote in favor. And so it
seems to be putting it very mildly. Yeah. Like it will not happen. We can just definitively say it will not happen.
Yeah, but if it requires all three things to happen and you take one of those out of play, it's not going to happen, right? So
yeah, there's some exceptions to that. So I think we're going to talk about one later. But
we're talking Congressional Review Act right now. Yeah.
And I'm,
You're still on that?
Well, I was going to say, like, it's, even if Republicans control the Senate, let's just say you had a secretary that put out an order that nobody liked and that Republicans couldn't agree with it either. Theoretically, you could see something like that get consensus through all three bodies, even though they were a split body. I'm not saying that has occurred, but I'm saying if it did.
Well, I don't think a secretarial order would be subject to the Congressional Review Act. It has to be something that goes through the Administrative Procedures Act
it's like a rule.
Yeah, it has to be
a process rule.
Right.
So not just guidance from somebody.
Correct. It has to be a notice and comment rulemaking, and I can't remember if it applies to records of decisions on.
No, I don't think it does.
But I don't think so either.
There's a list of things that need to be submitted to Congress for their within a period of time of when it is finalized, and that could be a hiccup too, because that. Not to get too wonky here, but
you're gonna.
But I'm gonna. So yeah, you could have a decision on a rule that basically interprets the Clean Water Act, and that becomes final on a certain day. That's not necessarily the date by which Congress cares. There's a period of time in which they have to actually submit it to a particular office in Congress for them to receive it and say, okay, we accept it, we know it's there. That's the date that matters. Is when they send it over to Congress for review. And so there's a lot of different dates at issue here.
Before everyone falls asleep.
But it needs to be something that is a rule that's implementing something that Congress has.
Let's just give a quick example.
Yeah.
So the administration implemented changes to the Endangered Species Act. or implementation of the Endangered Species Act, the rulemaking for that could be subject to the Congressional Review Act.
But not like a resource management plan decision.
Right, or a land management. Yeah.
Yeah.
But an actual implementing rule that an agency has to follow to implement a statute, right? That could be overturned. And there's a lot of those. I mean, you've got the NEPA rule, you've got the Endangered Species Act, you've got Migratory Bird Treaty Act. There are a lot of different rules that this administration has adopted.
It's generally only going to be those things that the courts haven't already overturned.
Right, and I maybe used a bad. That's true. I used a bad example potentially. I only used ESA as an example, but that may actually fall outside of that date time frame that it would qualify for Congressional Review Act.
Good.
So we don't know, but that's really wonky.
But
right?
Last time
Nephi's bored out of his mind.
I know. just there's importance on these dates and when they figure it out because it's possible that does fall out, but they didn't.
I'm so
submit
glad
it.
you're back, Mike.
They didn't submit it on time, and so maybe it's back in. There's a lot of things that there are people who can calculate that and will figure that out.
Yeah.
There you go. I like that. I like you tied a boat around that. I would just like to remind everybody that if you do care about the Georgia special election and what happens there, and you want to see some of this action play out, you may not move to Georgia in order to change the outcome of this election.
I knew you were going to do this.
Because it's a felony. So I don't care which party you are. Don't get in don't get in your van and drive to Georgia. And think that you can just vote in that election.
I love it when Nephi gives legal advice.
I do too. It's my favorite thing.
I'm just saying, don't do
especially, it's a felony. You can't move there and vote. Well,
not for this purpose. There was an AG's opinion that was put out by the Attorney General of Georgia actually this week related to that. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it.
Okay. Maybe we should reference that document instead of your own pontificating.
Zing. Sorry, Nephi.
Mike, I've been the only one trying to keep you from getting fired from this podcast. Now you just lost my endorsement. Now I'm on board with Dave.
I should be fired. Maybe we'll
you're out.
No, you keep this up. Right.
Yeah.
No,
lifetime contract, my friend. Lifetime contract.
We'll put it out to the listeners and they can decide.
Your job was in jeopardy. Dave was like, it was all the time I was texting, please leave Mike alone. Nope. Not anymore.
Exaggerating. We've missed you. This is why we've missed you. Okay, so that's the first thing. But there are, maybe we started with the wonkiest thing, right? And we can back off of that now. But really, we wanted to talk about, okay, what does this transition mean? And transition in the White House, what the makeup of the Senate and the House might look like. What does this mean from a federal policy standpoint for issues that hunters and anglers care about? And so we wanted to. I think we wanted to talk about that a little bit. Some of the different things, and then I have a big picture pontification I'd like to do at some point. That's definitely not policy, but it's more of a, hey, listen up, more of a, maybe counsel to those folks living in big cities that care about some of these issues too. Anyway, where do you want to go next with this? How about this? You mentioned this secretarial order.
Which one? Well,
so I think what you were referring to, and maybe a good place to start, is this Land and Water Conservation Fund, because you were talking about when we were, if you recall, just a few minutes ago. We can rewind.
I'll share it. I can, but you may want to fact check me, Mike.
Okay. I'll help. I'll help too. But I think you wanted to talk about this secretarial order that Secretary Bernhardt just issued.
Related to the Land and Water Conservation
Fund. Water Conservation
Fund. So basically, the what I want to talk about was Danes just put out a statement regarding this and saying, hey, this is not the right way to do business. But the secretarial order basically specified, it gave a veto button, if you will, to local government and state governments on decisions that were made regarding the spending of LWCF funds for purchase of lands to add to the federal estate.
Yeah, the federal acquisition side. Yeah,
and Danes, Tester, who else? There were a variety of other folks who weighed in, and there was an article in E&E specifically talking about that with a lot of the quotes saying like, no, this is not the right way to do business. In Congress, we have a list. They didn't even give us a list on time for these LWCF projects. Luckily, we have an opportunity in Congress to review these things, and we're not. But this was out of line. There should not be, this secretarial process for creating the stop button on these projects. This is under the discretion of Congress.
Well, one of the other things they pointed out, right, was that when the Great American Outdoors Act was being debated before it passed, while it was being discussed in the Senate. And the Great American Outdoors Act is as we've talked about before, is that piece of legislation that included permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, in addition to funding park maintenance, deferred park maintenance, right? But in that discussion, Senator Mike Lee from Utah was pushing to add a provision in the Great American Outdoors Act to say no federal spending without governor approval and local approval first, and there wasn't enough support for that to get that in the bill. So what's the next step? How do you get that in? Now, he's denying that he had any conversations with the Secretary's office on communicating on getting that language in there, and I'm not going to question whether that happened or not, but the language is in there now in the Secretarial Order.
That's right. So the stuff that they asked for legislatively that did not go in there, very similar language came out in the Secretarial Order, along with some interesting language that said not only do you have to do this, but also you can't not do this even if somebody undoes my secretarial order, which is just kind of a way of saying
that was pretty funny.
In infinity times, no, you're infinity time, 2 times infinity, 3 times infinity. It's kind of a.
I thought that part was funny. The other part, what I do think is worth mentioning, because I've had some people ask this already, is what the Secretary did legal. Basically saying, I'm going to condition the purchase between a willing buyer and a willing seller on the approval of a third party. Is that legal or not? And the answer to that question is yes. There's nothing illegal about what's in that order, right? There's nothing, like when I look at it on its face, I don't see anything illegal because even though there was a discussion about whether this provision should be put in the bill or not, and it ultimately wasn't put in there still isn't any language that says you cannot do this. Like you cannot involve a local government or a state government in this decision making. So I kind of look at it as absent a directive from Congress to say you can't do it, that there's some discretion with the Secretary to determine who I'm going to talk to and how I'm going to run this program. And so I don't view it as necessarily illegal. Is it going to be politically controversial? Certainly, right? But I think it's worth mentioning that. I don't think that's an illegal act. Now, Mike might want to step in and say, I disagree with you, and here's why it might be illegal. But I think if I were, and I'll use an example. Nephi, if I wanted to sell you a piece of property, and you said... I
wouldn't buy it from you.
And you said...
I don't trust you, Dave.
Man, you're messing up my example.
Okay, sorry.
You don't trust me, so you're not going to buy it unless your neighbor, Mike, says...
That's accurate.
That works for me.
Yep, that's accurate.
And that's perfectly acceptable.
I could ask Mike if he really wants to be
That could be a condition
of
the purchase. I'm not going to make this purchase until I get a letter from my neighbor Mike saying, yep, I have no qualms with you buying it from...
It makes sense to have local support for
I
something
agree with
like
that.
Right.
But to have it be a hard veto or the ability for someone to kind of shut something down that might have that might be a problem for a few individuals who happen to have some say in the area can be pretty problematic for the rest of us that might benefit from it, right?
Whereas there could be a way to write something that says, before finalizing this, you have to convene folks you have to seek input from people on the grounds and consider that input in making these decisions.
Right.
And you might make certain accommodations in your management as a result of that kind of feedback.
Yep. But there are a lot of processes like that, and they tend to not have any teeth, and that's why you
see
would see this
teeth in it.
Yeah, you're like, well, let's make this a hard, fast no or hard, fast yes. But it does create a lot of problems. It hands some of the decision making to folks who are not hired by the federal government to look out for the best interests of the federal government or the willing seller, right?
Right. But it's not illegal. It's not,
challenging it on legal terms.
You're rolling your eyes here, but I think, it's hard to call something until it actually goes through a judicial process to say it's definitively legal or illegal.
I wouldn't have called that an eye roll myself.
I think you were sort of like.
No, I was looking out the window.
I'd have called that a thoughtful stare, not an eye roll.
Yeah, personally. No, I can't see why it would be illegal to create that type of process. It just seems problematic.
I agree. Yeah, and here's what's going to happen though. Right? Here's the other thing is, don't lose a lot of sleep over this. Just because the other piece that's in there is, like, a secretary writing in, even if this order is reversed, everything in it's still good. I don't see that language holding up real well either. So, in a court of law. So I would suspect, and I think this is a fair assumption, that a new administration will come in and one of the first actions that a new Secretary of Interior would take is to reverse or invalidate that order and probably replace it with their own
there'll be some modifications made.
Yeah, and that will likely be one of the big ones.
Yeah, I kind of want to back up actually a lot, because we didn't cover this at the beginning. We kind of talked about the results of the election, but we didn't really talk with people about the results of the election and say, for those of you who are maybe on the cliff one way or the other, for everything that people may think changed with the flip in the seat in the presidency, a whole lot of things stayed the same. A lot of things stayed the same. When you looked at either the national picture, you had a tightening. You actually had a tightening in both houses in terms of you have more people are coming towards the Democratic side in the Senate, more people towards the Republican side in the House. But if you look at the state legislatures and governorships, it was remarkably constant to where everything has been. There was no giant sea change politically one way or the other. And I just bring that up because for people who are looking at this as either like doom and gloom because the presidency changed or because they thought that there was some, it was the rise of some new dramatically different day, I'd be cautious about pontificating too far in either one of those directions, because our politics stayed remarkably consistent throughout this election.
Yeah. With a couple of maybe not even a couple. I'd have to think pretty hard to think of a couple, but I can think of one exception. I think Montana swung pretty hard.
Hard back to the Republican side.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and
we're now more so evenly divided.
Yeah, but even though I would say Montana, I'm going to argue a little bit on that, because I think Montana is more centrist than people thought. There may have been, like, whether it's a D in the governorship and a D in the. I got to give Tester credit. He had a great new book that came out, and I think people who haven't, it's worth reading. And he talks about the need to come to the center in his writing. And I think he has been pragmatic. And I think that, for all the discussion about Bullock, I think he was pragmatic. And so I don't think you can take either of those two and just say, well, because they were Democrats, they were this. And I think you could say the same things about Daines. Daines probably had a far more pragmatic and conservationist view than maybe some others in the Republican Party had. And so Montana's a state that I think kind of defies those expectations of what you're getting from D's and R's.
Montana's interesting too. I kind of wanted to, I threw out Montana specifically because I was hoping we could talk about a ballot initiative that passed in Montana.
The local control ballot initiative?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. It was, so from a conservation standpoint, we're talking conservation.
Okay.
So I think from Montanans I know, they view themselves, I don't know if they view themselves more centrist or more libertarian. I think it's a fairly libertarian state, and I think this ballot initiative shows it. They've voted overwhelmingly to legalize or decriminalize marijuana for recreational use. And the revenue generated from that, 50% of that, is going to go to conservation. Which I thought was... that was kind of interesting.
They also voted in a ballot initiative to preclude local governments from the ability to regulate firearms. They said that sits at the state level. And so
taking away local control.
Taking away the ability
interesting.
for a local municipality to say we're going to outlaw green guns.
That's been an issue here in Wyoming too.
It has.
On multiple topics.
It has. But it just goes to show you that, and that was actually fairly close on that But I mean, that's Montana. Like
I still think Dave's is more interesting. Smoking weed for elk.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, it's
Oh man, I wish I could remember. Somebody told me
it's not unlike guns. Let's be honest. It's like the Pittman and Robertson of pot smoking.
I think they called it weed for wildlife or something
weed
like that.
Wow, that's even better.
Yeah, I've used that beer for deer slogan. I think it's
my goodness.
weed for wildlife.
Weed for wildlife.
So I kind of like that.
Montana.
Yeah, we have an opportunity in Wyoming. Not legalized here yet. One of the few states in this region that hasn't done
But
anything.
you do know it's still federally illegal.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. But
Just so we're
while we're on
clear,
that topic, I don't think this administration is going to
this
do
is
much
not
about
legal
prosecuting
advice.
that.
Just to be clear, this is not legal advice.
Okay, so
Just in case.
so that was you.
Mike, I don't want you to think I was telling people.
You want to get back to the political landscape
Yeah.
and away from giving legal advice?
Yes.
All right, political landscape. So you were mentioning that the states stayed remarkably similar. The federal level tightened, right? And so let's talk about that federal level. What does that tightening mean from a policy standpoint?
Nothing. Just kidding.
Like nothing is going to happen.
That's exactly right. No, it's just going to be it's going to be remarkably difficult for somebody who thought, let's just say that I won the election. I thought I was going to come up with a giant mandate to change the entire world. That doesn't exist. And then you could still spin it like it exists, but it doesn't. And in some ways, we should be happy about this from a conservation perspective, because you know what we've had the last 4 years? Lantani actually talked with me about this and said, you know what, we've had a remarkably successful 4 years where we've had divided government of getting stuff done for conservation. I think that may continue. I think we might actually see that same thing, where these issues that are important to hunters are going to actually stay very relevant, because they speak to the middle. They speak to the need for pragmatism.
And that's one of the things about a divided government too, right? Is in order to pass anything, you have to come to the middle, right? You can't just ram something through. There's no way to do that. So if you're going to pass anything, it's going to have to be in the spirit of cooperation and reaching across the aisle. And you're going to have to you're really going to have to work in the spirit of bipartisanship to try and get things done.
Because there's neither party, no matter how Georgia happens, neither party's going to have enough control in the Senate to really do anything. They're never going to get close to that 60 votes unless they really reach across the aisle and work towards common sense stuff. They'll pass the thing, the must pass type stuff, but to get bold initiatives through on conservation, it's going to take some middle of the road stuff.
Yeah.
And there's some good stuff sitting out there that's ripe for the middle of the road. Like there's Recovering America's Wildlife Act is still sitting out there, and it's very bipartisan and it was very popular in the House. It never moved, never got any movement in the Senate. But there's still a big opportunity there for a huge conservation win. And all that money goes back to states to help states manage their species of highest conservation need. Right? And so I think there's a real opportunity there. There's a real opportunity in an infrastructure package. Like there's language in existing, obviously everything that's been introduced this Congress, just rip it up. You have to reintroduce it in the next Congress. Mm-hmm. But there's an opportunity with an infrastructure package to get a lot of money for wildlife crossings all over the country, to invest in reducing vehicle and wildlife collisions.
This might be a random question, but do we have any money left?
We just print
as
more.
a country. I mean,
we just print it.
I just thought that might be
how it
important
works?
as we talk about, all the things we can spend money on. I'm like, does anybody pay taxes anymore, Mike?
We just borrow.
I was just
curious. Borrow, and that's how we're going to be able to shut the government down for 6 weeks.
I have to cash a couple of EE bonds here in the next few months. I hope the government holds up their end of the deal and pays me my interest that's due.
Oh yeah, they'll just reborrow.
Yeah, they'll pay my interest. And
when you buy another set of bonds, because let's be honest, you don't really want cash. You just want
government-backed bonds.
Yeah, that's you. You're not going to spend money on anything. I know you. Let's not kid ourselves here.
Yeah, but yeah, that's what it is. It's really just borrowing. We're just issuing more bonds and assuming that we're going to be in a place to be able to pay those bonds off in 5 years or 1 year or 20 years or 30 years. It's a house of cards we're building, man. It's a house of cards.
Well,
but while we're building it out of money that we're printing.
You know what's great though? Hunting. Just coming around for.
That's probably good. Don't want to get on a financial tangent. So here, what could happen? Let's talk about what can happen in the next couple of months too.
Okay.
So before we talk about transition, let's talk about.
Are we sure we want to go? Like, is there? I mean, I just want to revisit that statement you just said. We're going to talk about what's going to happen in the next several months, and I just want to say we've been terrible on this.
But I think
in general,
fortunately, I think history is a pretty good guide on this. So presidents at the end of their terms in office tend to do a few things.
I was making a joke about 2020, but
and predictions and
I
thought you were going to go back to Pendley and how we were just so wrong about that.
Actually was, but I was going to wait to do that. So, do you think William Perry Pendley will still have a job in the new administration?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not.
But that's what we thought before. I mean, what if? I mean, let's create the scenario. I mean,
the what if scenario of what if the secretary puts him in a career position?
You know what will happen
on his way out the door?
I will tell you.
I
will tell you what
burrow him into the agency.
I was going to say what will happen is like someone in a room, like 2 years from now, they'll just open a door in a room and he'll just be sitting there. Like still in the room.
Holding his stapler?
Yeah.
Just an old reference.
Yeah. He'll just hasn't never left. Like everyone's like, what? He's still here?
But back to this at hand, right? So that presidents at the end of their terms tend to do a few things. They want to wrap bows around outstanding like administrative work that has to happen. So regulations that have gone through comment and they want to get finalized. So they want to finalize
like the roadless rule that was signed on January
with the
19th
Clinton
or
administration.
20th Clinton,
yeah.
It was like the last day in office.
Perfect example,
right? As Bush was driving up to get sworn in.
A lot of presidents will do national monument declarations on their last week in office.
A lot of pardons.
My question on this one, a lot of pardons. I think we'll see a lot of that.
Yeah.
I do wonder, are we going to see monument designations or are we going to see monument
revocations?
Revocations.
You'll see revocations. I don't know.
At the very end. There's a possibility, right?
But okay, so
because that case hasn't been settled yet.
It could be. There could be a revocation, but we also know that we have the new administration already signaling going back to Bears Ears and redoing that.
Right, but isn't it possible that this administration just wants to throw the biggest turd in the punch bowl possible to hand to the new interior and say, we know what you're going to do, but we're going to make it hard for you to do it?
They could, but
that seems so unlike.
The thing is, though, David, you know that the stuff that makes it hard for them to undo are things that take time through the APA process.
Finalizing a rule, finalizing like outstanding RM resource management plans that haven't been finalized.
Right.
I would suspect you'll see some of those finalized in the next 60 days.
Okay, that's possible, but you also practical reality because I've been trying to push things through recently.
Yeah.
And the COVID impact on the Federal Register and its ability to publish things timely is it's sort of an sort of, I don't know, something you don't see in the news, but it can be an extra 4 or 6 weeks just because they're so backed up at getting stuff on the Federal Register and what you have to do to get that done and checked in. So you can take a month of that away. And so they better be making decisions now and pushing it through. And the Federal Register won't listen to anybody other than the agency that's asking for it to go through. But they've got so many different ones coming in the door at this last minute when it's a rush anyways.
Right.
So I think there's going to be just a natural consequence of COVID stopping.
There'll be a log jam that just doesn't get done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other piece is there are a lot of people that would be helping facilitate that are going to be taking new jobs.
Right.
And so you take the COVID impact, you take the fact that there's going to be, well, you already have a lot of empty positions that were never filled by this administration.
You do.
And now you're going to take the ones that were filled and a number of them are going to be
in addition to the fact
jobs.
That within the last couple of months, there's been direct decision by the Montana District Court on who and who cannot sign these things to make them finalized, right? And so
here's an interesting question on that.
This is just a shrinking number of people who have had the Senate confirmation authority in order to be able to sign something, unless the secretary is just going to go through and sign hundreds of things. He
so
may
here's
have
what
to,
might,
but
yeah.
So here's my question for you on that regards. And so on that regards, you've had that is under appeal, correct?
oh, I don't know if they ever filed.
I believe that it is.
They filed a notice of appeal,
Did
right?
they?
But I don't
Okay.
know that they've.
Well, here's the
it doesn't
question.
stay the decision.
If you're the
Right.
if you're the next president, would you not want to appeal that? So I mean, it's a really interesting issue because if I'm
I
in a
suspect
Biden
that litigation
presidency-
continues.
yeah, because even though you don't like who made the decisions, you would still want that flexibility in your administration.
Plus, even if the people aren't there anymore, the decisions have been made. It's not moot.
That was when we talked about this a couple of podcasts ago. That was my point. Was this decision is made by the Solicitor General, and he's going to look at it from the perspective of what does this mean for an executive branch to be able to make decisions, regardless of politics.
Yeah, he's not going to care.
Yeah, so you're looking at a situation where they probably may need the next administration comes in and like, well, maybe we should challenge this because we want to do it,
And if you're
or we may need this.
I mean, let's throw out this fascinating idea. Let's say that Steve Bullock is the next Secretary of Interior. He's going to want to have the flexibility that he just sued to take away.
Maybe.
Wouldn't that be apropos?
Wouldn't
Yeah.
that be crazy?
Maybe. Are you suggesting you think he's going to be the next Secretary of Interior?
You know what? I
Am I
like
just-
Steve Bullock.
Bullock's
And
name was
so-
in the New York Times had him on there. I think he was the first one they listed.
Yeah.
So, that's a possibility.
It's interesting though when you look at these processes, how they really play out. People don't know. There's a lot of the shiny object that gets waved around with these appointments that people don't necessarily see what's going on. And
we have fun with the media stuff, right?
Yes.
Like everybody pontificates and speculates about, who's it going to be? It's
Yeah.
going to be this person, that person. There's a different conversation going on behind the scenes.
I guarantee you, and believe it or not, Ryan Zinke was not the first choice for Interior.
We all know that.
Yeah. And we may or may not know if there was a different option.
I don't know that he was the second choice.
But let's just say that like the media never sniffed the person who was really choice number one. They had no idea.
Exactly.
And so that's going to happen here again. You're going to have people, this guy's going to do this and this guy's going to do that. And a lot of those people that are going to get, the media attention for potentially sitting in a chair, a lot of those people that don't really have a shot.
So what we know today and what we see in the press today, it may not be what ends up. And there's a lot of time between now and then. And they've got a lot of names they need to run through because there are 3,500 political appointments, right? And some of those are going to have to run through the political process and run through the Senate, but 2/3 of that doesn't. So, the plan usually for a transition is to have your list of the career folks that are not career, but political folks that are more in those staff positions ready to go day one, and then line up your nominations and run them through the process.
And there are things they have to think about with those nominations. When you're talking about, for example, Interior, right? You're going to see some names tossed around that just frankly don't make sense, right? There'll be names on the list that sound great, but then when you start looking at the political angle, you say, well, the Senate.
Let's play the Tester game. Let's just say that.
Let's do the test. That's a perfect example.
Let's say Tester, who's a pragmatist, who's from Montana. Let's say that somebody said, hey, we're going to have Tester's going to be the Secretary of Agriculture. Let's make him Secretary of Ag. So we can have Ag and Interior both out of Colorado at the same time.
Except that's Montana.
I'm sorry, out of Montana.
You just offended a lot of Montanans.
A lot of Coloradans
and
too.
Coloradans, yeah.
No,
That's where Wyoming. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah, we can't keep track of you guys
I'm
anymore.
going to go ahead and offend the people from Nebraska and Utah, too. I've probably told this joke, right? Because I'm looking at the wind blowing like crazy right now. We're sitting in Wyoming.
Yeah.
Why does the wind blow so hard here? Or why is it so windy here? You know? It's because Nebraska sucks and Utah blows.
Yeah.
There you
Old
go.
Wyoming joke. Sure, nobody's ever
Nobody's
heard of that
ever
before
heard
in
that
any other
Wyoming
state.
joke. Yeah, right?
So, but let's just say, so what happens?
So,
Let's say
so you think Tester?
well,
No,
I
he's
don't.
just playing
I don't
this
think
out.
it
No,
at all.
I'm just saying.
But let's just pretend I did.
You're yeah.
I'm going to
I
float.
think Tester would make a fine Secretary of
He would be
Agriculture.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, here's the problem.
Right.
No one.
Where's he sitting at right now?
He's a Democrat in the Senate.
No one
the
from
US
the
Senate.
Senate is going to get picked for any cabinet
which is like
position.
being,
Oh, well, I don't know if I would
It's like
say
being-
that. I think it totally depends on how the state, what
the
the
process
structure
that
is, the
backs it up.
process that backs that up, like how you replace a sitting senator in that state. In
In
Montana,
Yes. In Montana,
you have a special election.
Yeah, so it's up for grabs.
So it becomes up for grabs.
So it's not. So if you were in a state where that seat got appointed, and you had a governor who was sympathetic to getting a good.
Yeah. Say you had, take Montana. Let's just pick a state Z, right? And you have Tester, who's a Democrat in state Z, and you have a governor that's a Democrat, and you have the Democratic Party that nominates 3 possible replacements for that person, and then the governor picks. Yeah. Well, maybe that's a safer pick for a cabinet appointment.
That's assuming you want to even go down that road, and risk that you don't get a good result.
Right. No, so there's that kind of calculus that's going on.
So you got to be very careful if you were going to pull somebody out of Congress to fill a job that, you got to think about who's going to come in behind that guy. And if you really can risk that at this time when you have the stasis in government that we have.
And it would be a short-term, I guess, gain, if you want to say. You'd pull some from the Senate. And then you had this, if they're one of the states that has the appointment system, they've got to turn around and have a very, shortened time period re-election so to confirm that person to their seat in a lot of places. So it may only be for like a year or, in some places less than a year.
Or during that time period.
Where the people step up and then get to make a decision.
Yeah, sure. Or during that time period where, you could have a vacant seat, which you may actually want to have somebody sitting in while they're going through this entire process. So it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Now you have a little bit of flexibility in the House because they're the 12 seat majority now for Democrats in the House. So you could potentially pull 1 or 2 people.
But you're going to the same problem.
You're going to you're going to be looking ahead 2 years, like what's my midterm election going to look like, and what seats are really in play, and all that sort of stuff. Governors seem like a place where you might see some folks.
Yes, that's usual though. You're an executive agent. You're going to have to go run an executive department.
And don't discount either governors, current or former
governors are going to be hot commodities.
Yeah, or also
retiring.
So that comes back to Governor Bullock, right? Mm-hmm. Sitting governor that's going to be going out, ran for a Senate seat in a competitive race in Montana, was a popular governor that actually won a Democratic seat in a year that Trump won Montana.
Ran for president. And then was encouraged by the party, quite frankly, to run for the Senate. And is now left with lots of friends in the party who's going to be in the White House who may or may not feel like they owe him something for all that hard work.
Yeah, so you could see candidates that maybe were not elected but are competitive and competent and would be good, and those might be targets for some of those positions as well. And then there'll be some potential mining from businesses and non-government organizations, and there's a whole array of places where some of these appointments could come from. But don't just think that they're automatically going to. I think maybe the least likely place for them to come from is the Senate this time.
Yeah, that's probably true. Unless they're retiring from the Senate.
Yeah.
But and I think that it's just another caution on looking at the names in the paper. I was surprised, I think, last time at how many, just being involved at the level I was in, and how many people their names are in the paper, not because it's coming from a leak in the administration or a transition team, but because that person wanted their name in the paper. Right. And I said, I'm being considered for X. Yeah, they never were.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders in charge of labor, probably not going to happen.
Well, but that brings up another point, just that you bring up Bernie Sanders. Like maybe this will happen, maybe this won't. But one possibility is that the outcome in the Georgia runoffs could really impact what kind of people we see in those Senate confirmed positions. Maybe. Not necessarily, but it's possible that a Mitch McConnell might talk to a President-elect Biden and say, I will make this process easy for you if you send me some centrist Democrats, right? I will make it very difficult for you if you send me Bernie Sanders. Whereas if Georgia wins both of those seats, or Democrats win both of those seats in Georgia and then Democrats control the Senate, there might actually be a push to have those cabinet members lean farther on the political spectrum to the left. I'm not saying that'll happen. That's a possible outcome, though, right? Of that, and that's where the calculus comes in.
You'll still have to have some temperaments on that, because there are some middle of the road Democrats that may not be willing to go for someone too far to the left. And so, you got to get the number of votes. You got to figure out what you can whip.
Yep.
And figure it out.
That's true.
Yeah.
So it's all, but I also thought it was interesting. There was some report that President-elect Biden was going to have a bunch of names by Thanksgiving, which I think is ambitious.
As if he was planning this for a while.
Perhaps.
The infrastructure around the transition team is pretty robust. They've been thinking about this a while.
They have been, maybe more so than, my experience with 4 years ago was that they were building the infrastructure as they went. Once they won, they're like,
Wait,
whoa, now what?
Yeah.
And they were really building that infrastructure as they went. And I think you're right. I think Biden has spent months building an infrastructure.
It's interesting.
Anyway, so that's some of
it's challenging to do something that quick. It's interesting now. That's my new for the year.
You're gonna change.
I'm gonna say, well, this is interesting rather than it's challenging.
Back to the last second stuff. The last second actions that could happen from this administration. I don't know what they're going to be, but I just want to we pointed out monument designations and the roadless rule that came out with the Clinton administration. But at the end of the Obama administration, one thing that happened that wasn't at that level, but happened on the last day in office, was the then director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Dan Ash, wrote a director's order to ban all lead ammunition of all kinds within the entire National Wildlife Refuge system. Right, up to that point, I think the only thing that had to be non-lead was for waterfowl.
Waterfowl, yes.
But it was banned for ammunition and might have been tackle too. I think
it was, I believe.
So for all fishing and hunting activities, and then of course, that was of course one of those that was, it was literally on the last day as he's walking out the office, signs it and walks out, and then that's one of the first things reversed. But you don't know what, thinking below the secretarial level to the agency director level, what kind of director orders you might see on the last day. And
solicitor opinions.
And solicitor opinions. It's possible that there'll be a whole bunch of stuff that's put out there, and they know that they're going to get overturned. I mean, Dan had to know that was going to be one of the first things overturned, but he was laying down a marker, right? And so we did it, right? And it took some kind of an action to reverse it.
Very surprised that you would think that Director Ash would do something like that. That was purely political. No? All right. What else is on our list?
So those are the big things. Some of the other things might be, what kinds of actions might you expect in, say, the first year of a Biden administration? If you're interested in some of these wildlife conservation issues, what kinds of things might you expect in that first year? I guess I'd pose that. And is it going to be markedly different?
I would throw that back to you, Dave, and ask what you might expect, because I know that a lot of people have said that there has been criticism in some of the conservation community about the Trump administration and their actions in relation to conservation. But I think when you look at them as a whole, they actually did a lot of good stuff for hunters and sportsmen. So there were a lot of folks that were talking about excited about a Biden presidency, what they would bring to the table. But it seemed that most of what they thought from a wildlife benefit perspective, what they bring to the table for hunters and fishermen were very much tertiary benefits from environmental decisions. What's your thought process on that?
Well, so I think your point is that in the Trump administration, if you're a hunter or angler, the most tangible, noticeable things that you would see, like if I said, how are things different for me today than they were 4 years ago, right? As a hunter and angler, it'd be around access.
Yes.
Right?
It's like physically right now saying hunting is okay here, shooting is okay here.
Yep.
Those are the types of things that you saw concrete.
Right. So there was a big access focus with this with the current administration.
Access and opportunity.
Right. And then on some of the regulatory side, for some of the things that might have impacts on some of the habitats for those, that's where some of the concern came in, was, what kind of potential negative impacts might some of those decisions have, right?
Yes.
And so looking forward into the first year of a Biden administration, I don't, from an access standpoint, I think if things change from an access standpoint, I think it's going to be through litigation, not through action of the administration.
So you don't see your crystal ball says no rollbacks
on like hunter access to refuges and things like that.
Yes.
I can't say no rollbacks. I think there's going to be a push. We've talked about this before, the Alaska Preserve. I think there's going to be a push for restrictions on certain types of hunting, not all hunting, but certain types of hunting in those preserves in Alaska.
The one we talked about where they would reinstate what is already not allowed by the state.
Yeah, well, no, there are things that are allowed by the state
for certain populations.
That's right.
So they would reinstate a ban on things that are currently allowed by the state.
But most of it was already.
Most of it was not allowed.
So we're talking about
subsistence hunting.
Basically, the Native Alaskans practices that they utilize.
So I think you could find. I think you might find pressure on very specific places and types of practices, maybe certain species types of hunting. Do I think there's going to be a blanket rollback and you're just not going to have the access that you had as a whole? No, I don't think so. The one exception to that is, like I said, if it's litigation based, because I think we talked about this, but if we didn't, there's the lawsuit filed by Center for Biological Diversity challenging this administration's rule this year on allowing access to however many national wildlife refuges it was for hunting and angling.
And basically that put them in the catbird seat to be able to then go to settlement.
Right, to try and settle it.
Yes. And if you had, and to be fair, if let's be honest, the reason that benefits them is because they think if they got the right administration and they went to settlement, then they can get the outcome that they want without just by saying, hey, see, we sued you. And then the administration can say, well, we kind of had to do this. We got sued.
Well, maybe. I wouldn't put words in the mouth there a little bit, because I think it's used potentially by this organization because they're worried that they might not have that access they want. And this is their way to get the foot in the door, is through this type of lawsuit. And then the hope is that this administration, it would give them leverage, and this administration would be open to discussing settlement. Now, until we see who's nominated for the positions of Secretary of Interior and Fish and Wildlife Service, I think that'll determine whether there's a willingness to settle that or to let it play out. So that lawsuit is looming from an access standpoint out there, and how the a future administration responds to that is looming out there. But do I think that this a future administration is going to come in and say, we're going to shut down hunting on refuges? I don't think that's going to happen.
It's an unknown, isn't it? Until you know who is there, who the advisors are, what they really think, what they're doing now, you just don't know.
You don't, but I'm kind of going on the record right now saying I think that's unlikely.
It seems like there's other issues that'll be bigger.
Exactly.
I agree with that.
Exactly.
And have more focus in the initial. I mean, maybe down the road they get around to it. But
part of the danger of saying that, though, is, this is the reality, is like these issues that, they're very important to us. They seem like small potatoes to some other people. And if they seem like small potatoes to you, then you don't have a concern with rolling things back, with changing the way things are. Because, again, it depends on your estimation of how important the population you're going to make mad is to you.
Well, and that's why I think it's going to be so important how the administration implements LWCF. Because if LWCF is implemented in a way that's really focused on access, and if the conservation community, the sportsman's community, if everybody's pushing on appropriate implementation of LWCF and pushes an access narrative, like they're going to get that message, right? Access, and that's going to become a big deal for the administration. There are going to be other priorities too. Like I think we did that episode on 30 by 30. I think 30 by 30 is going to become something that a Biden administration starts focusing on across agencies, not just, I think it's going to, Fish and Wildlife Service and Interior for sure, but I think across agencies, that's going to be something where they're going to start creating a policy around that.
They're going to try and build messaging for that.
But I don't know what that policy is going to look like. And I don't think they know what that policy is going to look like right now. So there's an opportunity, which is why I think we talked about the Hunt Eat 30-30, the hunting community getting involved in messaging around what conserving 30% of land and water by
Really means
2030 really
like.
means, and there's an opportunity for Sportsmen to really help influence what that might look like in a future administration or in a Biden administration. So, I know that doesn't really answer it because I don't think anybody knows yet. Just like nobody really knew when the Trump administration came in because he never campaigned on any of those issues. What was it going to look like? And it really depends on who the secretary is.
And that's exactly, to kind of circle around to the big takeaway from this for me from this election is that oftentimes we fixate on the person who sits in the seat of the presidency and who that person is, when the reality is who we really need to pay attention to is the team he brings in with him. Because so many of these decisions that may be very impactful for us in the hunting community, those probably aren't the big decisions. That's probably not the things that Biden cares about, number one. That may not even be in his circle of trust. If you take the top 10 people, he cares what they think. It may not matter to those people. And so you have to say, okay, these other people that are coming on board, what do those people think? So, the Sportsmen for Biden community, let's say some of those people go up. Where do those people sit in the circle of influence, and what are their opinions on these things? Those are the types of things that are going to become impactful on these issues, I believe.
I think you're right. I think you're spot on. So I think this is a pretty good summary. I still have my pontificate thing I want to do, or my little short lecture. Does you guys have anything you want to?
Is it going to be legal
mention?
lecture again?
No, it's not. It's absolutely not.
Mike will find that very entertaining.
I think you'll like what I'm going to say.
And I'll just pack up.
Yeah. No, I think you'll like what I'm going to say.
Oh, okay.
I'm interested to hear what you have to say. What's your announcement?
All right, here's my deal. And this has been bothering me. This has been really actually bothering me since the election. And it's been bothering me more than just this election, but go back. You've all seen the maps, right? The maps of the counties in the country and how they vote.
Haven't looked at them at all.
Not a single
I'm still
time.
with my gut.
Yeah, right. But you've seen that map, right? How which candidate each county voted for in this country, and you've seen some of the memes of one of the things I see out there is people vote, not land, and you have the high concentrations of blue in big cities, and so it looks like this red wave across the country, even when you have an election that's pretty evenly split, but the vast majority of counties voted for Trump, right? So I look at it differently than this. People vote, not land. When I wear my, working in the conservation world and the wildlife world, look at it this way. 70% of this country is privately owned. That map that you see, the red on that map is where the habitat is. The red on that map is where the wildlife is. The red on that map is where the water that feeds your municipalities in these big cities is where it's originating in these high mountains, right? The red on that map is like that is the future for conservation. And the thing that's bothered me and that I struggle with so much is that I feel like, and we live in those red places here, so maybe this biases are coming through, but I feel like for so long that you have these bigger cities that want to dictate how you do conservation in these smaller places and tell this landowner that's been out there for 5 generations, what the right way to manage their land is. And tell a municipality that's been running, their water supply for, 150 years, you're not doing it right. That they want to have these big mandates and tell people how to do things rather than the flip side of saying, reaching out to those folks on the ground and saying, what are the challenges? What are the opportunities? How can we help you, right? And like start sharing ideas, and rather than doing a mandate, really working at the ground level. And my hope for, one of the things I hope for out of this new administration is if Biden's words are true, right? That he says, I want to be a bridge to both parties. I don't view it as a bridge to both parties. I view it as we need a bridge between urban and rural America. It is one of the big bridges we need. And I hope that's something that can be done from a wildlife and a conservation standpoint, because like I said, those red spaces on the map, that's where that's where your wildlife and habitat are. And if you want to have open spaces, you want to have wildlife and clean air and clean water, you need to talk to the people that live in those places. They matter. Anyway, that's my kind of
I like it.
diatribe.
Interesting that you should bring that up, because that's a lot of what, remember I mentioned Tester's book. It's exactly what he's saying.
Is it? What's the name of his book? Do you know?
Gosh, I don't recall.
Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I just don't want to endorse the book, and so I really remember, but I'm not telling you. But
you endorsed it earlier. You said everybody should read this book.
They should. Yeah. But the reason, basically he was talking about how that exact issue, that divide, and how he has been successful in Montana, and how that applies to people every place else. And I don't think it's party specific. I think it's something that is important for everybody to kind of learn how to work across these lines. And part of it is trying to understand the challenges. If we live in rural America, we need to try and understand those challenges of urban America and what makes them think that. And for me, I often think about this. So why would a person in Los Angeles, did you get the name, Mike? What is it?
Grounded.
Grounded.
A senator's lesson on winning back rural America.
So from the other side of the coin, what are the concerns in these urban centers that lead them to, why to line up in a way that some people in rural America might find confrontational with what they want. And I think you got to remember where they live at. If you live in an apartment in New York City, you know what? You probably do care a whole lot about open space because you don't have any. You probably do look out the window and you say, wow, this really stinks. What place isn't like this? And you look at a state like Wyoming or Montana, you go, well, I want to preserve that. I want to keep that just how it is because I wish I had it. And we don't have it anymore. And so it's important to know that those perspectives exist, and from the people living in that area to say, hey, we live here. This is not a zoo. We still live here, to be able to reach out. And also, though, to understand why they want that thing that they don't have, that they have lost, and to find that middle ground in helping them, understanding each other.
I think you're right, and I missed that piece of it. Of the bridge works both ways, right? It has to work both ways. I've just been feeling some frustration recently, so my bridge is a one-way street right now. but I totally get.
Half the country thinks you're right.
Yeah. And the other half, thinks I should walk that bridge and talk to them, and they're right. Your point is well taken.
Let's just not be the people that literally try and. So it's so popular right now. There are a huge number of people on the outskirts who actually want to just burn the bridge down, and that's what we can't allow to have. That's what we cannot allow in this country. I mean, that's what's happening is people trying to. I mean, I hate the rhetoric of like, oh, we're more divided than we've ever been. Can we ever come back? Like, no, we can. And talking to each other gets us there. But this idea that somehow we're better off if we just, quit talking to the other side, if we just basically cut the bridge.
I don't think we are as divided as they say we are.
I don't either.
I actually agree with you.
Talk to your neighbor.
Yeah.
The people you interact with on a daily basis, everything's great. Just don't watch the news. Don't read the news, and make that be your view of life.
And don't go to protests.
I can take the craziest, the craziest person on either side. I won't say liberal or conservative, and just sit and talk to them for 20 minutes and find out that like we really have so much in common.
Yeah.
And yes, there may be something that they threw out there on Facebook that he was like, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe they said that. But reality is, once we get around the dinner table together, we really, really get along. We all do. And that's what we need to do more of.
That's the piece is we need to talk like this to each other more and not through texts and, social media posts. And, we need face-to-face conversation and relationship building and bridge building.
6 feet apart with masks on, but
yes.
There is a loss that we've had in that connection.
You bet.
In just all throughout the world.
I would tell you that's one of the scariest things about this whole COVID thing is people are like, oh my, we've realized that we can just live in our basement and we really can just talk to each other on Zoom. I'm like, no, we cannot. We cannot.
You are such an extrovert. This has got to be driving you nuts. I'm such an introvert. This has been the best 8 months of my life.
It's been like an 8-month vacation.
Like, this is perfect.
I'm kind of in between you guys. Dude. I have good days and bad.
I am like, I can't believe it.
Now, if it was a disease that prevented me from going outside and enjoying the outdoors in the summer in Wyoming, then I'd have a real problem with them.
I don't even want to think about that possibility.
Yeah. So that's why I say it's been great.
I would actually.
It has not been
great. I would walk
great.
into the teeth of that disease. right into the teeth of that disease.
So nothing about 2020 has been phenomenal.
It's not over yet. We still have 6 weeks.
Imagine what can happen.
So many things.
It could be exciting. I mean,
it's not been good for a lot of people, but on balance, I'm okay.
Yeah. A lot of people, meaning like any people.
Anyways.
Not even you, Mike. You think it's better, but I see you wasting away in your basement. I'm worried about you.
Yeah, I did gain weight.
It's a call for help.
I played basketball with you a while back.
Yeah.
You did.
He got his COVID-19.
Yeah, he did. He's a force in the post now.
That's right. You're right.
Okay.
It was a good.
I think this is a really good discussion. I think we're at a pretty good. We're starting to go down some. I think we're off topic. Let's put it that way.
We have hours and hours of space left in our Libsyn account.
I know,
though.
but
let's fill it right now.
No, let's
not.
Now. Let's fill it next week and the week after and the week after that. So
we'll tell you all the crazy stuff we did last month.
Yeah, we will, but not today because we're going to end this thing right now. I think we've touched on all the good stuff.
Yep. We've
gone wonky. We've gone philosophical. We've gone legal. We've kind of covered all the bases here, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's a pretty solid podcast. If if I don't want to, I'll pat you on the back. I don't want, but from a distance.
Thank you.
Nice job.
From 6 feet with a mask on.
Mike made all the difference. It's good to have you back.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. Send us, actually, before we stop, if you've got questions for us, like I'd like to do an episode where we just answer listener questions at some point, Q&A kind of thing. Mm-hmm. If you've got questions, shoot us questions that we might be able to incorporate into a future podcast. And we can do a Q&A on things that you're wondering about.
What if no one sends questions?
Well, we're not. People are going to send questions. People have questions.
I just feel immensely insecure that you're giving out.
I think people have questions.
Well, why don't you tell him the address that he can send those questions to?
I'll send them.
If you have questions, Nephi.
I like it.
If you have questions for Mike or myself of the legal nature,
I'm not.
Or anything else,
they're not going to come from me, right?
Yeah. Your Mountain at itsyourmountain.com. Or you can send them directly to us through our social media channels at Facebook, at Instagram, at Twitter, all of them at the handle at It's Your Mountain. So reach out to us in any of those places. Ask us any questions you have. Give us future topic ideas for podcasts. Give us feedback, whatever you want. We try and respond to everything.
Don't move to Georgia.
Okay.
That's all I have.
At least not. Well, you can move to Georgia. I think that the key was if you move there in the next 6 weeks, don't vote in the next 6 weeks in Georgia.
And then move back. Don't do that.
Don't do that. But you can move to Georgia if you want.
I don't know why.
Anyway, send us questions. Keep listening to the podcast. If you haven't reviewed us on iTunes, go out there and give us a review. Give us a 5-star rating. We'd really appreciate that. As we've said before, that's our motivation to keep doing this. That and hearing from all of you, we really appreciate that feedback. We'll get back onto a more regular schedule. And until then, remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.